Okay, welcome everybody to the fourth annual Innovations in the Science of Cannabis Conference, sponsored by the Michael G. DeGroote Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research. We are delighted to be with you today, and we have a very exciting two-day program. To start, let us recognize and acknowledge that many of us today are meeting and learning on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. I want to also start by thanking a lot of the people who've made this event come together today and have agreed to participate. To start, the DeGroote Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research is supported by the DeGroote Initiative for Innovation in Healthcare. We are fortunate to be entirely supported in our core operations by this philanthropic gift and do not rely on any kind of external or commercial funding. I also want to thank the Conference Advisory Committee that was essential for our continuing medical education accreditation, as well as our staff. The Conference Advisory Committee comprises myself, Dr. Jason Bussa, our medical advisor on the side of pain, Dr. Ramesh Zacharias, and our medical advisor on the side of mental health, Dr. Jennifer Brash, as well as Dr. Lean Naji, a family care physician. We're very grateful for their contributions, and also to Mr. Alan Fine, who is our research coordinator, who has been dedicated to putting on this event in many of the DeGroote Center's activities and has done an outstanding job. I also want to thank all of the speakers today and tomorrow. We'll get into more detail in a second, but we have a really world-class group of keynotes, and we have excellent representatives from both national and international research stakeholders to give us updates. And I've been absolutely delighted by the volume and quality of the poster presentations that have been submitted for our meeting. I very much encourage you to view those asynchronous sessions via our YouTube channel. And the link is also in your program. So I think it's going to be a really stimulating and intellectually engaging couple of days. Thank you so much for being with us. To start, for those of you who aren't familiar with our center, I want to make sure that our vision and mission are clear. And often people make assumptions about our perspective because we are a medicinal cannabis research center. They assume that we are advocates for medical cannabis or explicit proponents for medical cannabis, and that's really not the case. Our vision is applying the lens of evidence-based medicine to medical cannabis. Our vision is to promote an evidence-based understanding of medical cannabis, including both its therapeutic effects and its associated risks across different conditions. To do that, our mission is to use the highest standards of research methodology to advance the understanding of medical cannabis. And really below that, we have a threefold approach to our mission. Part of the goal is to curate and synthesize the existing body of knowledge on medical cannabis to make the best recommendations and guidelines around medical cannabis. The second priority is to create a network of researchers and clinicians dedicated to an evidence-based understanding of cannabis here at McMaster University and St. Joseph's Healthcare Hamilton. And of course, at the core of the center is our research program, which is to support and incubate innovative research projects that will produce new knowledge that will advance the evidence basis for medical cannabis and for our understanding of cannabis use more generally. To elucidate this a bit further, our first strategy, curating the evidence-based, is really most exemplified by a lot of our online knowledge translation materials. We produce research summaries in which we take important reports, studies coming from the primary literature, and we then convert them into summaries that make the findings accessible for the general public. We also do evidence briefs, which are concise, consolidated overviews on what the state of the evidence is on a given topic. And in some cases, we do knowledge syntheses, which are deeper dives into specific topics. Some examples of recent evidence briefs and knowledge syntheses we've done include the state of the evidence on contamination of contraband cannabis products, the safety profile of cannabidiol, which is so widely consumed now for a wide variety of conditions, and also whether or not there is any merit to a lot of the speculation we've seen about cannabis as a possible therapeutic for COVID-19. Basically, where there are emerging questions, we want to provide information that's accessible for clinicians, researchers, and the general public to speak to those issues. We're also delighted to partner with the McMaster Center for Continuing Education to offer a certificate in the science of cannabis. This certificate is 3 university courses, all delivered in an online environment. The first course is Fundamentals of Cannabis and Cannabinoids. The second course focuses on understanding the potential risks and harms of cannabis use. And the third course is an introduction to the evidence-based medicine framework, the GRADE approach, and also how that can be applied to understanding the evidence for and against cannabis for different conditions. This has been a huge success from our standpoint, and we've also been delighted to partner with Lehman College, part of the City University of New York, to expand our learner base and hopefully provide much needed education in other jurisdictions where cannabis is becoming legal, such as the case in New York State. In terms of creating a network, we continue to be delighted to have such a wide variety of faculty at McMaster affiliated with our center. The majority of our faculty are affiliated either with the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Neurosciences or anesthesia, but we also have representation from pediatrics, health evidence and impact, oncology, molecular medicine, and so it's really a highly multidisciplinary undertaking, and the recognition is that many of the questions that pertain to the science of cannabis really transcend any single disciplinary perspective and require this kind of interdisciplinarity to really move the evidence forward. In terms of our research program, there are really 3 major thrusts, and this is in keeping with focusing on both potential benefits and potential harms. When it comes to potential benefits, we see a number of conditions for which the evidence seems to be either promising or at least warranting considerably further examination. In particular, our primary target is pain, including both cancer and non-cancer pain, but also we see promising data when it comes to sleep disorders. We know that many patients report using medical cannabis for anxiety and other mental health conditions, so we view that as a priority for further investigation. We've also seen very promising preclinical data when it comes to topical cannabinoids to improve antimicrobial resistance, and also promising preclinical data when it comes to medical cannabis for the treatment of alcohol use disorder. On the other side, there are a number of adverse consequences that are also priorities for our center. The first is understanding the nature of cannabis use disorder, and in particular, the prevalence of cannabis use disorder, both in general and among individuals who are using medical cannabis. We're also very interested in how cannabis use in general and among medical cannabis patients affects cognitive processing and neurocognitive function, how it may either ameliorate or exacerbate psychiatric symptoms or contribute to psychiatric disorders. And because the dominant route of administration continues to be via inhalation, we're very interested in the risk profile in terms of cannabis use and lung health. Finally, across these 2 domains, we're also critically interested in how the legalization of cannabis for non-medical purposes has changed cannabis use in Canada. This took place now over 4 years ago, and actually a bit under 4 years ago, and there have been substantial changes, and it's hard to understand either the benefits or the harms without that broader context of how legalization is changing the landscape. To dive a little more deeply into our priorities when it comes to therapeutic effects, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Dr. Bussa, our Associate Director, who will tell you a bit more about our priorities in that area.
Thanks, James. So we have made a number of important progresses since the Institute since our center was started. We've been able to successfully navigate the challenges to acquiring cannabis research licenses. We now have those in place at both McMaster University and at St. Joe's Health Sciences Institute. We've also now been able to acquire a license to do analytics of cannabis products. Special thanks to Jennifer Roberts and Tracy Campbell for all their efforts in helping us to acquire those. In addition, there's been a number of changes that have been very favorable towards pursuing research, clinical trials on cannabis products. There had been a situation for a period of time where the regulations to do research on cannabis were actually greater than the regulations required by companies to sell those same products for therapeutic use in Canada. That's now changed to some degree. We helped author a open letter to Health Canada in 2021. They've taken that quite seriously, and there's now been a better alignment in terms of the requirements to do research with what researchers are able to accomplish. And that's allowed us now to acquire some of these clinical trial licenses that we now have. There's also been an elimination from the Canadian Revenue Association for the requirement of licenses for individuals doing clinical trial research on cannabis. And in addition, there's some anticipated changes. No longer will you require a clinical trials license if you're going to administer cannabis to humans for non-therapeutic purposes. So to look at the pharmacokinetics, for example, and there's an anticipated move to expand the number of sites that are able to do analytic testing. So a number of important steps that have been very favorable towards encouraging research in this space in Canada. In addition, there has been challenges to doing clinical trials, both from the perspective of licensing, but also because of COVID. It's been difficult to enroll patients in studies that require in-person interaction. But we have been active in terms of evidence syntheses, curating the knowledge that is out there to try to provide what guidance we can. This culminated in a number of projects. Two that have received some attention was the release of a review on the role of medical cannabis for chronic pain and an associated rapid recommendation, which both came out in the British Medical Journal last year in October. This work has also been complemented by a CHR-funded grant to pursue definitive guidelines on the possible role of medical cannabis for chronic pain. And importantly, this grant comes with 3 years of dedicated funding to pursue knowledge transfer and impact work. We've also just begun the first clinical trial looking at the administration of cannabidiol to potentially reduce the rate of persistent pain after total knee replacement surgery. So a number of important initiatives have come to front, and a number are going to be coming out in the near future.
Thank you, Jason. There are a number of emerging priorities in terms of our research on adverse consequences of cannabis use. In particular, we're very actively undertaking studies looking at the prevalence of cannabis use disorder among individuals who are using medical cannabis. Unfortunately, we know that there's a lot of precedence for the development of addictive disorders based on initial therapeutic use. The most obvious example of this is the opioid use disorder epidemic and overdose crisis currently, in which individuals were originally prescribed opioids to manage pain, but ultimately developed opioid use disorder. And there are increasing reports identifying that the rates of cannabis use disorder are non-trivial. We're seeing that in our own data also. And so we're highly prioritizing understanding the extent to which cannabis use disorder may be present and may be produced by medical cannabis use. We're also prioritizing treatment development for cannabis use disorder. The reality is that the prevalence of CUD is below tobacco use disorder or alcohol use disorder, but above all the other substance use disorders, and not trivial by any means. It's a long-held myth that cannabis is not addictive. The other reality is that there are no approved medications for treating cannabis use disorder, and so there's a very high need for treatment development, and this is going to be increasingly a priority for the DeGroote Center. And finally, again, emphasizing that over time, we recognize that things are changing as a result of legalization and indeed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So increasingly understanding those changes over time is a high priority for the center. In terms of our meeting today and tomorrow, we are so delighted to be hosting in this first session a set of, this is a typo, it's synchronous presentations from national and international research stakeholders. We're delighted to have Dr. Nina Clooney here from CIHR, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, Dr. Heather Kimmel from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, part of the National Institutes of Health in the US, Dr. Robert Gabrys from the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction, and Mary Bartram from the Mental Health Commission of Canada, the other major NGO that's focusing on substance use and mental health. In addition, we also have Dr. Ramesh Zacharias, President and CEO of the Veterans Affairs Canada Chronic Pain Centre of Excellence, and Dr. Fardus Hosseini, President and CEO of the Counterpart, focusing on post-traumatic stress disorder, the President and CEO of the Atlas Institute for Veterans and Families, and last but by no means least, Dr. Jean Costello, the Director of Evaluation from the Homewood Research Institute, which has also prioritized understanding the harms associated with cannabis. We have three outstanding synchronous keynote speakers. We have Dr. Krista Lisdahl, who will be addressing the relationship between cannabis and cognition later today at 1:30 p.m. this afternoon. Dr. Danielle Piamelli from UC Irvine, who will be giving us a deep introduction to the endocannabinoid system. Dr. Piamelli was one of the foundational contributors to the field in terms of identifying the characteristics and architecture of the endocannabinoid system. So that should be extremely edifying. And last, we have Dr. Ziva Cooper from UCLA tomorrow at 3 p.m., who will be giving us a presentation on cannabis and pain, one of the topics that is a very high priority for our center. So we are delighted to have a very rich program this year. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. So where you should go each day just depends on either morning and afternoon Zoom links. There's not one omnibus Zoom link for all aspects of the meeting, and the Zoom links are not individual by presentation. They're either by morning or afternoon. When you're participating in a session, the easiest way to ask questions is through the Q&A button. You can always put questions in the chat, but it can be hard to keep on top of those questions. So we would encourage people to use that Q&A button. And if you do have any issues, just shoot us an email at cmcr@mcmaster.ca, and we can send you a Zoom link or any other information that you might need. With that, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to our meeting. And of course, if there are technical difficulties, do bear with us.